All right, let's talk spoilers. So if you've been following the MCU so far, then you should be able to figure out pretty quickly that this show does take place after both Infinity War and Endgame, which was actually kind of confusing to me, especially when I first saw the first trailer for this, considering how towards the end of Infinity War, Vision dies. Vision is killed by Thanos, and he never comes back in at the end of Endgame like everyone else does. So seeing the trailer for the show, that was immediately my first question was, how is Vision back? And I'm sure that was probably the same question that was on a lot of people's minds was, what are these two doing in a 1950s sitcom, and how is Vision still alive? It's pretty obvious by the end of episode 1, during that dinner scene with Vision's boss and his boss's wife, that something is up. Something is not right. You got that not only from just the mere idea of them being there, but also you can see that something is going on, and Wanda actually might have something to do with it when she tells Vision, when Vision's boss is choking on his dinner, and nothing is happening, no one is saying anything, and Wanda finally tells Vision to save him, to save his life, because he is going to die if he doesn't do that. So that right there tells you that something's not right, and these people are acting way too normal for something like this unusual to happen. And that's what I really liked about the show, was that it again, like I said, the mystery of the first 2 or 3 episodes, the first 3 episodes, takes its time. You know, there are more disturbances that happen, and the further you get into the season, the more unusual and the more tense they start to become. But you're learning a little bit, you know, as it goes. Like, it doesn't just like shove you right into it right from the get-go. It actually takes its time with unfolding within these episodes. And finally, I think by like episode 4, we finally get some kind of explanation as to what is going on. Right when the trailers were coming out, I did have, because everyone had their fan theory. I had a few fan theories of my own, and for the most part, like some of it came true. Like the idea that they were inside like this, that they were inside this anomaly or this almost purgatory created by Wanda. That, you know, I thought of that right from the start, right when the trailers came out, that this was something that she created because she was still mourning the loss of Vision and the fact that he did not come back, much like everyone else did. So she creates this anomaly. She creates this purgatory for the two of them to live in, and it's probably in the most like optimistic kind of way, like the most, I kind of want to say fake optimistic kind of way, you know, and what better fake optimistic environment can you immerse yourself in than the 1950s? and speaking of the 1950s, that was probably my favorite part of this entire show, was just the fact that the majority of the episodes were based on satirizing the different decades of television, and I thought that was a genius move to do. It was something that the MCU had never done up until this point, as far as I know, and it felt fresh, it felt new, and it felt creative also. Above all things, it felt very creative. It was probably the most creative thing that the MCU has done thus far. Like right from the start, you could tell which shows or which sitcoms this show was satirizing. You know, the 50s was I Love Lucy or Dick Van Dyke. The 60s was Mary Tyler Moore Show, or even I Dream of Jeannie or Bewitched. 70s was obviously the Brady Bunch and the Partridge Family as well. The 80s was Family Ties and probably a couple other episodes or a couple other sitcoms that I'm missing. The 90s, right from the start, I absolutely could figure out that it was satirizing Malcolm in the Middle just by the intro alone that they were doing. And then finally, the early 2000s, which made sense because like you could tell that they were satirizing Modern Family, The Goldbergs, all the other ABC sitcoms because it's Disney. You could tell by just it being in mostly modern day, but also the fact that it was doing that format of cutting away to like the actors or the characters like talking to the camera and everything. It was a lot of fun seeing how they were very tongue-in-cheek about about television history, really. I will admit also that when I watched episode 1, seeing the traditional kind of sitcom feel definitely brought me back to when I was watching some of the Disney Channel sitcoms like Sister Sister or That's So Raven or Sweet Life. It didn't, as a Disney property, it wasn't really unknown, but as a Marvel property or as a MCU story, it felt very fresh and new. And as I said, that was one of the highlights for me for the show. One of the other things that I really enjoyed, particularly whenever they were in TV land, was, as I said, they would do these commercials, which always somehow had the same two actors in every decade. They were always satirizing like these different commercials from the different decades, but also particularly like you could tell that they were always making some kind of reference to the MCU or to even the Marvel comic book universe, maybe to even things that haven't been explored in the MCU. But it was still a lot of fun to see how these commercials would play out and what new reference would we get every week. Not to mention also, I didn't write this down, but also the fact that Disney Plus is able to have every episode come out weekly. You don't get the episodes right away. You don't get to binge watch it, much like how you can with Netflix. Disney Plus, very much like Amazon Prime and Hulu, actually takes its time and actually shows every new episode at the end of every week. And I miss that. I miss that so much, and it absolutely helped with that television experience. And honestly, like this show came out at the best time for television, at one of the best times, because it really showed its appreciation with those references to classic television. It was a way of looking back at those shows and showing a great appreciation for them, while also moving forward in the evolution of television. Like we have definitely come so far with television, with all these different streaming sites, and it really was a really nice treat to actually see that, to see that kind of appreciation done by one of these streaming services. So now on to the characters. So even though this show is about Wanda and Vision, I felt like a lot of the side characters actually got some good material out of this. Particularly Jimmy Wong, I think, is the character's name from Ant-Man and the Wasp. I know back then he was definitely used. His comedic talents were definitely more utilized in that movie, but here he's definitely playing it a lot more straight than he was, which I thought was good. When I found out that he was going to be in this, and that Kat Dennings as Darcy, who was from the Thor movies, when I thought that the two of them were going to be in this show, I thought, oh no, they're both going to be like they're both going to be insufferable to get through. They're both going to be equally as annoying, and they're going to be working off of each other. But fortunately, that didn't happen. Fortunately, they were able to. Well, I shouldn't say that. Fortunately, only Darcy was the only annoying one out of the group. But as I said before, we also got a new character, or maybe not so new. We got an older Monica Rambeau, who most of you guys might remember from the Captain Marvel movie, the daughter of Carol's best friend, Maria Rambeau, the little girl who was like her surrogate daughter, or like little sister or friend, basically. We see her now fully grown, and we see that she's actually working for that government agency. I'm just gonna say it. Monica was my favorite character in the whole show, because this was a different character, and for the most part, like, I could kind of tell where some story aspects were going with Wanda and Vision, but with Monica, it again, like, it felt very fresh and new, and I didn't really know. I knew nothing about her comic book character. I guess Photon is her name. I knew nothing about Photon or Monica Rambeau from the comics going into this. So, and I don't know for sure if this is 100% accurate to how she got her powers in the comics. I doubt it, but it's still interesting to see how she becomes this new superhero in the show. And I honestly thought that her character arc was really fascinating, and it really helps her character as being an ally to Wanda, but also it also helps with the overall theme of the show, which I didn't get into in the last video, but I definitely want to get into with this one. But we'll get to that in a little bit. Quicksilver makes a cameo in the show, or sorry, Quicksilver. Yeah, I thought it was pretty funny, knowing that they got Evan Peters to come in to play Quicksilver, seeing as how he did a really good job with that character in the X-Men movies. And I thought it was also kind of ironic how Disney actually included him as Quicksilver, because now they own Fox, and so I thought it was both clever and funny having him come back as that character. But then again, I kept thinking to myself, well, did Aaron Taylor Johnson not want to come back or something like that, or did they not approach him? But then the show actually references and says, like, you look different, like you don't look the same that you did back in Age of Ultron, which, okay, that's another thing that I really I don't know, I can't say that I fully enjoyed it, or if I just flat out tolerated it, but this show really, it gets really meta in like the midway point of the show, when all the sword agents, that's what the new government agency is called now, when the sword agents were, looking up who some of the townspeople in Westview were, and they were basically just, especially when Darcy was looking at the TV screens and actually watching the show WandaVision, because it's an actual show in this universe now. Just a lot of her exposition was just completely meta exposition, and it didn't feel like natural dialogue. It felt like it was basically just the show. Excuse me. It basically just felt like the show was confirming all the fan theories that were going on earlier in the season and everything like that. It at the same time, like, it was both tongue-in-cheek funny, but it was also kind of getting annoying, just how very like meta it was. I'm like, okay, can we keep going with this and just stop being meta for once and just stop pandering to the fans, please? So there were a lot of elements of the story that I kind of I had some kind of knowledge about going into the show before it came out, particularly when it came to I think it was Avengers Disassembled, where Wanda does sort of mess around with reality a little bit, and she does try bringing Vision back, and she does try to have kids with him, but they turn out to not be real, which obviously does happen at the towards the end of the season. But it was interesting seeing how they were starting to bring those elements in. I didn't think that this story was going to go into like House of M territory or anything like that. For one thing, because we don't have any X-Men in this, not yet anyway. but it was still interesting to see those story elements sort of come into play in this show, and I was really interested to see how exactly it plays into future stories, particularly with Doctor Strange, because apparently in Doctor Strange's next movie coming out, I guess Wanda is supposed to show up. Although I did read in the comics that Doctor Strange did teach Wanda like the mystic arts, and eventually had her become the new Sorcerer Supreme. Which, I mean, if they do stick with that in further movies, that will definitely be interesting to see. It'd be a nice welcome change for Wanda's character, definitely. So going into the show, and while I was writing down notes for the show, I wrote down two different questions while in my notes, and I kept those two questions in mind while I was watching every single episode, and basically trying to figure out the overall theme of the story. And those two questions were, what happens in the story, and what is the story about? It was interesting for this because basically for the what happens question, you could basically just say that you could basically give the plot summary and just apply that to that question. What happens? Two Avengers are stuck in this purgatory anomaly, living the lives of American sitcom characters, and that's about it. But what is the story about is applying to the overall theme of the story, and it was interesting to see where the show was going with the story, and I figured it out pretty early on. But the story is basically about the struggles of loss and how we move on from the aftermath of loss. And for the most part, I thought the show handled it decently. It could have gone much more deeper into it and make it much more realistic and much more, well, for the lack of a better term, depressing. But it's Disney. It's Disney. So I can't really fault the story for that much. But it made it. But for what we got, as far as like handling depression and handling the struggles of loss, I think for the most part it did kind of handle it pretty well, as well as it could. I mean, it could have been a lot worse, particularly for the character of Wanda Maximoff, because throughout the MCU, she has just been the most depressing character out of all the Avengers in this entire universe, because you consider that she lost her parents at childhood, she lost her twin brother at the end of Age of Ultron, and then at the end of Infinity War, she loses her lover, and at the end of Endgame, she does not get her lover back like everyone else does. Her lover stays dead, essentially. So it makes sense for this character to go through something like this, and to just be plagued with this much depression and this much anger and hatred, and just she and Elizabeth Olsen, like she really sells this performance, like she really does, particularly in episode 8, and pretty much as far as I can remember, since Iron Man 3, the MCU has not had a character, a major character, who has gone through the amount of depression or has actually dealt with the subject of mental illness. There might be a couple that I'm missing, but as far as I know, since Tony Stark going through his anxiety phase in Iron Man 3, we haven't really had an Avengers character go through something like that outside of Wanda, and that's and that's a fascinating way to see how they talk about stuff like this, and what better character to embody that theme than Wanda Maximoff. So now I'm gonna go into what I didn't really like about the show. So as I said, I really enjoyed the show. I really did. I had a good time with it. I'm glad I watched it. But it definitely does have problems. For one thing, I thought that, I don't know, I think it was because I was more into the sitcom aspects, that when it kept going in and out of reality and going back to being an MCU movie or story, it was kind of losing me a little bit. Outside of anything having to do with Monica Rambeau, everything else was just, it felt pretty much by the numbers. But yeah, and especially in the final episode, it felt very much like it was back to being an MCU story, essentially. But the biggest thing for me was one of the big twists towards the end of the season. I think it might have been like episode 7 or something like that, the end of episode 7, where it's revealed that the final boss, final villain, or whatever you want to call her, is revealed to be Agnes, their Wanda and Vision's nosy neighbor, who's been in every single episode since the start, and who actually, and I will say this, who was played very, very beautifully by Catherine Hahn. She definitely sold that character very well, and I was completely with her character up until that point. Okay, so I'm not gonna say that her reveal wasn't entertaining, because it absolutely was, and I did think that was pretty cute. Having her intro at the end of episode 7 clearly be a satire of the monsters, essentially, and I did think that was funny. But what bothered me about that reveal was the fact that this story had a villain to begin with, and pretty much up until episode 7, I kept thinking that this story was not going to have a villain, and that it didn't need a villain, because it honestly felt like, again, sort of referencing back to the comics, Wanda started out as a villain, and even though she was doing villainous things in this show by encasing herself and Vision and everyone else in Westview in this anomaly, in this hexagon, as they call it, in this hex, as they call it, basically against their will. Yes, it was definitely villainous of her to do that, but it also made sense for her character, again, because she started out as a villain, both in the comics and in the MCU. And throughout the MCU, we have seen hints that she could potentially become so powerful and so unstable that she could do something at this big of a scale, which she does. But the other thing is that, going back to the theme of depression and the theme of coping with loss, how many people have actually gone through the similar emotions as she did? How many people have lost a loved one, and have gone through the different stages of grief and have wanted to, turn back time or bring their loved ones back or go back to a happier time where they don't have to worry about the sad times at all. How many people have gone through stuff like that in real life? And how many people have actually reacted to other people trying to comfort them in a very negative way, in a nasty and negative way? And how many times do some of those people think that the one who's depressed is, acting irrationally or acting unreasonable or anything like that? But it's simply just their emotions getting the better of them because they're not in a good place, because they're not in the right frame of mind, and because they're hurting. And so they either just want to be left alone, or they are just so riddled with emotions that they can't think straight or anything like that. So when the idea of Wanda doing all this stuff and acting essentially like a villain, it made sense. And I know there were some fans who kept saying that, well, no, we can't have her do this because then fans would sort of lose faith in her. They wouldn't want to follow her anymore, or they would think differently of her. And I kept thinking, not really, because it's a very normal and a very human reaction, considering everything that she has gone through. And the idea of Disney and of Marvel taking on a theme like this, especially after everything that all of us have been going through this past year, I thought was a very ballsy move for them to do. I thought that was very courageous for them to, at the very least, address something like that. And so that's why I thought I didn't think Agnes as the villain, as Agatha Harkness, I didn't think her reveal or her being the villain ruined the show or ruined the story, but I thought it at the very least cheapened the story. I thought it cheapened the weight of the story and the weight of Wanda as a character. And again, going to the final episode, her fight with Agatha at the very end, again, just it felt very much like we were back in an MCU superhero beat 'em up movie, where all the depth of the characters and the depth of the story had pretty much just been thrown out the window. And that's also why I thought Monica Rambeau worked very much as a character as well, because she shares that sorrow and that weight with Wanda, because and for Monica especially, not only did she lose her mother, she lost her mother. We find out in the show that while Monica was actually one of the people that got snapped at the end of Infinity War, but when she finally comes back, her mom is gone. Like, she realizes that her mom died while she was gone. So not only are you dealing with just the trauma of dying and coming back, or essentially being wiped away from existence, but also coming back from that, not knowing what to do, but also that you've lost your family members in the process while you were gone. So now how do you move on from that? How do you cope with that? And so you have these two different things merging into one, these two different elements of grief and of just existentialism, really, just merged into one. And you don't really know how to react to it, And so again, like that's something that Monica shares with Wanda, because Wanda herself went through something like that as well. And so again, just I didn't think having a villain in this ruined it. Again, I understood halfway through the final episode that, okay, this is a comic book story. It's based off of comic book characters. You kind of need to have a villain and all that stuff. And because again, it's Disney, so they're not gonna do anything that courageous by having the main character essentially be the villain at the same time. But at the end of the day, I thought the story itself would have been much stronger if it just stuck with it being Wanda and all these other characters trying to get through to Wanda and try to snap her out of it and try to and try to help her especially. So again, like it didn't ruin the show for me. I still very much enjoyed it overall. Guys, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you watching this video and the non-spoiler video as well. And I'm really curious to see what you guys thought of WandaVision. Definitely leave a comment down below, and I'd love to hear what your guys' thoughts were. But until then, I'll talk to you guys next time. Take care.